And joining us live from Colorado, Rocky Mountain himself, Ryan Johnston. Ryan, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, Ty. Love coming to Denver. I love love all the. They haven't really embraced the Mile High thing here enough. You know, there's not any restaurants that are named 5,280 or anything like that. It just like you don't see any reminders every place you go that you're a mile into the air.
How many restaurants do you think have the Mile High burger? There's got to be at least like 75, right? Like probably just like or the Elevation burger.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere at the arena. It's everywhere in the city. I mean, even in the hotel, by the mini bar, you can buy a thing of oxygen. Believe it or not, they have these little mini oxygen tanks that you can purchase if you're feeling a little lightheaded from the elevation.
That is wild to me. I don't think I would do well there. I don't think I would do well, but to be honest with you. One thing I've heard about Denver, and I don't know how much insight you would have because you're a professional and you're in the press box, you're not in the stands. You hear that the beer is very cheap at the arenas in Colorado because it's Colorado. They got Coors right there, so it's not an expensive drink to go to these games. So if you're a Bruins fan, you want to go out there, maybe you can catch a flight and get there in time for the game tonight, and have some $4 beers. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't turn my nose up at a couple during some of these games. But yeah, I would imagine that would be the case. I mean, there's actually, I just pulled up the list of beer. It's not that cheap here.
Really? It is at Rockies games. Maybe that's what I'm thinking.
As of last year, they were in the top 10 in highest beer prices in the league by team. So that's not surprising. The New York Rangers ranked number 1 on that list.
Oh, what a shock! James Dolan is gouging people. That's
right.
How uncharacteristic of him. The Boston Bruins. Hopefully, you don't have to drink tonight because hopefully the Boston Bruins do not dig themselves into a massive hole like they did on Monday and on Thursday. We talked about it with Bob Beers in the first hour. You look at those two games, and I think the biggest takeaway is this team can't chase. They're not built to chase. They're not built to play that run-and-gun kind of style. And I thought Marco, 5 games in, that's about as pissed as a head coach can get after that game, talking with the media about just how frustrated he was with their lack of, adjustments and trying to play a style that does not suit their skill sets this season.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty telling. I saw the quote from Marco in when he was talking to Nesson, I think it was right after the game, and he said, he was asked, about his team, and he pointed out Jeremy Swayman as a positive. And I mean, it's not often you do that when your goaltender, has given up 6 goals, but I certainly don't pin that loss on him because I think and you and Beersy were talking about it. He was under siege for most of the game. You're playing against a team like Vegas, and they've got so many players that it fills you with dread to see the puck on their stick. I mean, you just know that they've got some really special talent up there, and their power play is really something to watch. I would recommend people if, when, a team like Vegas comes to town or when Colorado comes to town next week, like go see these teams in person because it's a different game that they're playing sometimes out there that most other teams in this league aspire to. That said, the Bruins in the last couple of games, and really even if you go back to the Chicago game, haven't really, played the same defensive level of hockey that we saw in the first couple of games of the season against, or actually, I guess it was first and second games were different than what we saw in the first half of the Tampa game, and then really the last 2 games total. So it's something that he's been telling us is going to be a work in progress. We saw it right out of the gate on opening night. You thought, well, maybe they're a little bit further ahead than we would have expected them to be at this point. And, but you get against some of these teams and you really have to try and lock it down. And they just haven't been able to do that against a team with the offensive skill and that Vegas has. And so they'll have to figure out how to do that tonight against Colorado.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like me being a Bostonian and me loving to whine about everything, but like I said it off the jump of the show today. Like if you told me the Bruins were going to begin the year 3-2 and their 2 losses were going to be 1-goal losses, like I feel good about that, right? It's just both these last 2 games I thought felt maybe perhaps not winnable, but pointable, right? You could get a point out of it if you convert on the power play against Tampa or the power play in the third period against Vegas. And these are the sort of the margins this team has to kind of live in and exist in and try to thrive in. It's just they can't afford too many of those nights where you're hanging around with a better team but get nothing to show for it, because those can hurt, right? Like, those can hurt this team, just given their limitations that they themselves have acknowledged. And even Marco has acknowledged, basically saying, like, I don't want to play like that because we're not going to win games like that. And so it's really interesting, I think. It's just, you want to feel good, but you realize, like, if you put up 5 goals, you got to win that game, right? And it's not the goaltender's fault necessarily, but defensively, like, you can't be leaky to that point. And I don't put Monday on Korpisalo, and I don't put Thursday on Swayman. It's just they were not good enough in front of those goaltenders.
Yeah, and that was, listen, as much as people wanted Swayman to be better last year, and in parts of the season wanted Korpisalo to be better last year. That was a big part of the problem, was that the team in front of them was just not good enough defensively. And, a goalie can only do so much. I mean, they can absolutely steal you games, and both of those guys are capable of doing that. But if you're giving up, and you gave some of the numbers earlier about the high danger chances that Vegas had the other night. I mean, it was like, it was a shooting gallery. And, you can't give up 37 shots to Vegas and give up that many high danger chances and expect that you're going to win games. And, we say it all the time that the team is not built to outscore its mistakes. Well, they're making too many defensive mistakes. And, it was the case in the first half of the game against Tampa, and it's the case for most of the game against Vegas.
We talked to Bob about this, and I want your opinion as well here. What do you do with the second line? Right? I just, you want to squeeze maximum value out of these guys. Like I've jokingly called it the pump and dump line, where you want to rebuild their values and maybe sell them off at the deadline. But it's not sustainable, Ryan, to have a second line where 2 of the 3 members finish the game with under 12 minutes. I mean, that's not a second line by definition. And so, yeah, I just wonder, like, what can you do with Middlestad and Arvidsson here to get them going, or to just reinvigorate your second line? Because it hasn't been a great start 5-on-5 for the top line. They had a great opening night, I thought, in Washington. But, since then, 5-on-5, it's been a bit of a struggle for them. And so what can you do here to kind of get that line going? Because you can't afford, that kind of lack of production and that ice time. They got to get more out of them.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting test in patience here for Marco Sturm about, what can you do, and as you guys were talking about, there are, kind of limited options right now as to, what changes that you can make and how much you want to put the lines in a blender here. I think certainly, seeing them bump Zacha up and move Geekie around the other night, and I don't know that that's ideal. I think, we certainly know that Pastrnak and Geekie together can create some magic, and Lindholm has been good in the middle of that first line. So do you want to mess with that at all? So if you keep that, those 3 together, which one would assume you would, then your options are fairly limited. It's also, we don't know Arvidsson that well. Marco knows him better than we do. But we don't know Arvidsson that well as a Bruin. He's only 5 games in. Middlestad came over end of last year. We didn't really get I didn't think, a good sense of where he's at, because there wasn't a heck of a lot around him when he was playing down the stretch here after the trade deadline. And so we're kind of still getting to know what those guys are and what they can be here with the group of talent around them. And so, is a 5-game sample size enough to say, okay, this isn't working? Do you just take what you've seen in the last game or 2 and say, okay, well, something needs to be juggled here? It's possible, but I'm not really sure what direction you go in, because, listen, Mikey Eyssimont, I really like him as a player. Tanner Jeannot, I really like him as a player. I like what we've seen out of them so far, and they're chipping in offensively. But is that more because they're playing third line and they're, the matchups that they're against is a guy like Mark Kastelic, who's gotten off to a good start offensively, and Sean Corrali had a couple assists the other night. They're better suited for where they are in the lineup, I would think. And so, that second line, it feels like, there's going to have to be at some point a decision made about what can we do here going forward to shake things up, because this team it's not going to be successful long term if you're not getting enough production out of that second unit. You have to get something better than what they've gotten so far.
Yeah, it's been maddening, right? And this is where I kind of go back to the media day press conference that Don Sweeney and Cam Neely and Charlie Jacobs had, where, Don is referencing why certain guys didn't make the team, and he's citing results. Okay, well, if Arvidsson's not getting results, but you have guys in the minors that are getting results, how long of a leash do you give your veteran players? And you understand their leash is going to be longer, but if you enter the year saying results matter, and you have a second line that's not producing results, and then you look at the AHL scoreboard right now, and the Providence Bruins had 4 guys in the top 10 after last weekend's games, you do wonder, right? Like, because it's a new era, right? We all agree it's a new era for this team. And so I just feel like that's something that they have to also watch as well, because you don't want guys in the minors, getting disengaged or dispirited, whatever the term you want to use, because they're not getting an opportunity when they're producing. And so this is a tricky balance, I think, for them, for the Bruins, and being a team that, wants to win now, but also is acknowledging that they might not be where they were, say 4 years ago. So this is all part of the game that they kind of have to juggle, and it can be tricky, I think, for a team, to your point.
But you also, I heard you, talking earlier about, Marty Necas here in Colorado, and the interest level that the Bruins may have in him this coming offseason when he's an unrestricted free agent. He hasn't signed yet here in Colorado, and it's difficult to imagine how they're going to be able to fit him in if they wanted to keep him here long term, because they've got the McCarr deal coming. I mean, they've got a lot in front of them here, and some really good players that are it seems like in front of him in line. So if that's the case, can you swing a deal for a player like that, whether it's him or somebody else around the league who's on an expiring contract that maybe is not necessarily looking to stay put? Could they go out on the trade market and try and add somebody here midstream early on in the season and help to bolster the offensive depth on this team? And not even depth, but maybe somebody a little bit higher up in the lineup. Is that a possibility at this point? And is the team, are they in a position where they feel like adding one more offensive player might kind of give you the jolt that you need up front? I don't know.
Yeah, that's part. I feel like they're due for like the Hampus Lindholm move all over again, right? Where they go out and they acquire a guy and they immediately extend him, because it's like, well, what other option do we have? Those guys don't hit the market, so we gotta strike while we can, and that's been the problem, is that a lot of those guys end up not hitting the market, especially with where the salary cap is and where it's going, and teams kind of understanding that they've got some extra money to spend here in the future. A lot of teams they're locking these guys up a year early when they have the opportunity to, and so by the time you get to next summer's free agent market, it may not be all that deep, and so if you got to go out and give up something of value to get something of value, then certainly you got to think about that.